Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. Hey, how are you fertilizing your plants? Are you going out every month or maybe even every week with a watering can, fertilizer, and a teaspoon? Or maybe you're tossing granules on the ground around your plants and then raking them in gently, making sure not to harm your plants, of course. And then you have to water in those fertilizer granules. Is that what you're doing? That is time consuming. You want some time back to do something else? Well, then today's podcast is for you. It's all about fertigation. What's that? We'll explain. It's episode 130 of the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, brought to you today by Smart Pots. And we'll do it all in under 30 minutes. Let's go.
Hi, Fred. This is Andrew from Elk Grove, California, calling up with a question for you and Steve Zine. I guess part one of this question is I'm using a drip system for the garden, and I've been fertilizing through a siphon mixer. I've been mixing, it's all organic, fish emulsion and seaweed extract to the right proportions via the siphon mixer, which is a great time saver for the garden. So question one for you and Steve is, do you have any product recommendations for the most effective concentration of fertilizer and ascophyllum nodosum seaweed for the garden, and a good price point, like the most cost effective products recommendations or just general tips? And then two, I'm thinking about putting in a fertigation system. Are there any products or recommendations you guys have for, concentrations or a certain soluble substance or products to look out for that aren't going to, clog up the emitters or anything like that? Anyway, Fred, keep up the good work. Appreciate everything you do. Thank you.
I'm going to wait for the dogs to stop barking. Well, that's certainly beyond garden basics, but it's still important. It's basically an easier way to fertilize your garden through this thing called fertigation. What's that all about? Let's bring in the alleged Zine. Actually, it's Steve Zion, Sacramento's organic advocate. He has been preaching soil health for, I would say, probably 45 years or more. Mr. C, what about all this fertigation stuff? Now, you've been touting, actually, the siphon appliance, if you will, that Andrew talked about.
Yeah, I've been using, a hose siphon commercially for 45 years. And basically what a hose siphon is, I think he's using a siphon injector, and that's a little different, but it's the same basic principle. Hose siphon is less expensive and easier to use, but basically you hook the siphon or hose siphon to your spigot is usually the easiest way to do that. You put a concentration of fertilizer in a container. With the hose siphon, it's just typically a bucket. And the hose siphon or the siphon mixer will tell you the dilution rate. And if it's like 6-to-1 in that bucket or container, you have to make that concentration of fertilizer stronger. Because what happens is you'll put a little hose down into that bucket, and then when you turn on the water on your hose, the water propelling past that siphon will suck up some of the fertilizer in that container, and then it'll come out the end of the hose. And that can be emitters, that can be a nozzle. I used it as a nozzle to apply foliar fertilizer. And if you make sure that you get fertilizer that's not going to clog up your hose siphon or your siphon mixer, or if you're using a drip system, your emitters, it works very, very effectively. You just have to be very careful on the kinds of fertilizers that you use, that they will completely dissolve or they're going to plug up the system.
All right, let's talk a little bit about that siphon recipe you were talking about there for people trying to do math in their head and listen to you at the same time. Talk a little bit about the siphon devices, too, are fairly inexpensive. They're available at good nurseries. And like you say, one end connects to your hose faucet, and another part goes into the bucket, and then you fill the bucket with the concoction. And you talked about a ratio. So let's say it's a 2-gallon bucket. Talk about the particular fertilizer you use and how much of it you put in, say, a 2-gallon bucket, if that's what you use.
I use a 5-gallon bucket. Or I did when I was doing it commercially. I don't remember you basically have to, let's just say it's a 1-gallon bucket, and the directions say a tablespoon per gallon. And the hose siphon says the concentration is 6-to-1. So you have to make that fertilizer concoction 6 times stronger because it's going to be diluted. And so instead of a tablespoon per gallon, you would add 6 tablespoons per gallon in that container. Be sure to stir it up. One of the things with a hose siphon, the nozzle has to be one not that conserves water because it's all based on flow. So you need a fair amount of flow in order for that hose siphon to work. That's the advantage of the siphon mixers. They don't need as much flow, and they're much more expensive. So you need to utilize a nozzle. The ones that I like to use, they look like a small fire hose nozzle. Open it up and let that water flow, and you'll see that if the hose siphon is working, the liquid in that container will go down.
Okay, well, yeah, okay. What you're talking about is a very commonly available brass nozzle that you can adjust from completely off and into a cone shape or into a jet shape as far as the flow of the water.
Right, and you do that by turning the nozzle.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And if you turn it all the way the other way, I think it comes apart. No, and when you turn it all the way...
Actually, it does.
Yes. Well, if you turn it mostly all the other way, it flows out, but not strongly. It seems to be a big flow, but it's not like pressurized.
Right, yeah.
And that's where you would set it?
Well, I mean, you want to get it close to that, and even you can open it so it's more of a fine spray. It needs to be open fairly wide. I mean, it's hard to say. Each nozzle is different, and so when you're trying it out, if you're trying to do a foliar feed, you want it somewhat of a mist or a fine spray. So open it up so it's not quite a fine mist, and I would just use your trial with water and see what kind of spray, how much you have to turn that nozzle to have it suck the water in through the hose. Also, you can only use, like in most cases, a 50 or 75 foot hose. I'd probably suggest a 50 foot hose, because the longer the hose, the less volume you're going to get, believe it or not, and less pressure.
Fear not the manufacturer of the siphon devices, because you can use whatever fertilizer you want in that, because there is one very popular siphon device that's made by a very popular commercial synthetic fertilizer company, but it's still it's a good device.
Yeah. And the trick is it needs to be 100% water soluble.
Yeah. So what fertilizer do you use? You can't be using fish emulsion in that.
No, you can't use you can't use fish emulsion. I was surprised that if I recall correctly, Andrew was saying he was using fish emulsion. Fish emulsion by regulation needs to be a large percentage of solids, and typically they're 50% solid. And they will clog up your drip lines. They will clog up your hose siphons. And so I use what's called a fish hydrolysate. It's made different. Instead of a heat, they use low heat. It's digested by enzymes, which keeps the product more biologically active, and you actually get more bang for your buck. The brand that I use is from Peaceful Valley. It's their liquid fish fertilizer. And then the seaweed that I use, and I highly recommend, is MaxiCrop seaweed. And you want to use the liquid.
And let's clear up something that Andrew said that may have people scratching their head. He gave the not the botanical name, but the species name for that particular kelp that's in MaxiCrop, and you pronounce it.
Ascophyllum nodosum. And when you buy a seaweed fertilizer, that's the thing you want to make sure somewhere on that label, it will say materials derived from. And it should say Ascophyllum nodosum. And ideally, you don't want it to say anything else. There are some seaweed fertilizers that contain synthetic materials. And as far as I'm concerned, you want to go all organic. And so make sure it's an organic product. And the one I used for 45 years, and a lot of the research that was done on seaweed fertilizers was done with MaxiCrop. And I highly recommend that material.
But that's just one component of the fertilizer.
In the MaxiCrop, the only thing that's in there is the Ascophyllum nodosum.
Right, and so, that's just micronutrients, really, isn't it?
55 trace minerals, vitamins, growth hormones, and the unique thing about the seaweed fertilizers, the Ascophyllum nodosum, those things that I just listed, you will not find in any other fertilizer. And those things your plants need. It's been amazing over my 45 years when I've done a consultation and the plants were looking sick, and I would apply a fish fertilizer, the fish hydrolysate along with the kelp, and the plants would turn around within 30 days. I'm convinced that every time that it wasn't so much the nitrogen in the fish, but it was the trace minerals. Trace minerals aren't considered essential nutrients. They're, not every plant needs it all the time. But there are times when in that plant's growth cycle that it needs some of those trace minerals in very, very small amounts. And so when you apply that to the plant, it makes the plant healthy and happy very, very quickly. When you apply it to the foliage, it's much more rapidly integrated into the entire plant from root to leaf. In this case, from leaf to root, versus when you apply it to the ground, it can take 30 days to get up to the leaves. Well, if you apply the fertilizer to the foliage, it'll get throughout that plant within 24 to 48 hours.
Let's stress one thing you did say about when you're using that siphon is that it should be a liquid product, not a powdered product. And when if you go to groworganic.com, which is Peaceful Valley Farm Supply's website, you're going to see a lot of fish fertilizers.
Yep.
And so then you got to figure out, okay, now which ones are going to have some good flow, especially in drip irrigation systems.
Yeah, well, actually, some of the powders do dilute very, very well and can be used in drip systems and using siphon devices. You just have to make sure you get the right one. One of the things you just mentioned, the Peaceful Valley Farm Supply, groworganic.com website. They also have what's called a fertilizer solution chart. And they actually list all of the fertilizers that they sell, and it lists whether they are certified organic, and almost all of them are. And then they've got a column that says solution grade for fertigation. And so if that fertilizer is checked off in that column, you can use it. And some of those are powdered materials. And so when you're using that powdered material, what you need to do is first dilute that, put that powder or granular or whatever, or dust into a container, mix it with water as recommended, and stir it up really, really good to get it in complete suspension and dilution. Actually, it doesn't, it goes out of suspension and should totally dissolve.
Again, that website he mentioned, the page is the fertilizer solution chart that is up on the Peaceful Valley Farm Supply website. I'll have a link to it in today's show notes. But basically, I found the easiest way to do it instead of trying to search through the Peaceful Valley website is just Google fertilizer solution chart Peaceful Valley, and it pops right up. And there are a lot of fertilizers listed on this.
Yeah.
9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I'm counting them. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 different fertilizer combinations that are suitable for fertigation then that would work on a drip system.
Yes, and those are just the ones that they sell. There are others out there as well.
All right. Obviously want to match the fertilizer for whatever crop you're going. You You've heard me talk about Smart Pots, the award-winning fabric planter here on the Garden Basics podcast. They're durable and reusable. I've been using mine for 5 years now, and once again, they're being pressed into service in my yard. I have this problem. I grow too many tomatoes for the amount of allotted sunny space I have for them. So those extra tomato plants go into the Smart Pots. I place them in scattered areas around the yard where I know they'll get enough sun, which is a premium in my yard. And even 5 years later, I can pick up those Smart Pots, plant and all, and move them around without fear of the Smart Pot tearing or ripping. Smart Pot's breathable fabric creates a healthy root structure for plants, and Smart Pots come in a wide variety of sizes and colors. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pots lightweight fabric containers. And don't forget that /Fred part, because on that page are details of discounts where you can buy Smart Pots at Amazon. Okay, now I understand maybe you want to see the Smart Pots before you buy them. That's not a problem. Smart Pots are available at independent garden centers and select Ace and True Value stores nationwide. To find a store near you, visit smartpots.com/Fred. And I think more and more, this is just a little side note, is that when it comes to permanent crops like fruit trees or bearing shrubs, that sometimes just 4 inches of mulch may be all you need for a consistent crop. Now, when it comes to annual crops, yeah, you probably do want to add fertilizer for a single growing season.
Well, the thing with those kinds of recommendations, I think that's fine once you get your soil in shape and you get your soil happy and healthy with those microbes. And so I think some fertilizer as per a soil test is very helpful in the beginning, and then put down good quality compost and my favorite, earthworm castings. What can happen is that, for example, we have numerous days of over 100-degree temperatures and maybe throw in a little bit of smoke. I mean, those two things happen so rarely here in California.
He's being facetious, folks.
And so it stresses the plant. When the plant's stressed, even though you have a happy, healthy soil, the plants aren't capable of absorbing the nutrients like they normally would. And so applying a liquid fertilizer to the leaves, like a liquid fish mixed with seaweed, the plant's going to get everything it needs. So it'll help your plant get through those stressful times. Even if you have a healthy soil where you've got the biology all working happy and healthy, getting the nutrients to the plants, when the plants aren't happy due to stress, the foliar fertilizer can make a big difference over that stressful time.
Now, without starting a foliar feeding argument here, I will say that one benefit of foliar feeding is in smoky situations, it washes the ash off the leaves, which will improve photosynthesis. And just rinsing your leaves off is going to minimize pest problems, too.
Very much so, especially things like mites. Another thing that I really like about foliar feeding is it gets you out in the garden and landscape. And so you're looking at your plants. And if you do this once a month, which is what I did commercially for my clients, I looked at the plants very carefully as I was spraying them. And if they didn't look quite right, I put my sprayer down and I went over there and looked at the leaves and examined the stems and looked for pest problems, looked for symptoms of disease. And that way you can, often catch the problem before it gets to be a serious issue, and you can deal with it as necessary.
And that's a very good piece of advice for summertime vegetable gardening, because if you do inspect your plants carefully, you're sure to find a baseball bat-sized zucchini that you can harvest.
Yes.
And feed to the cows or whatever.
Yep.
Now,
the big ones are nice. I used to take the big ones, slice them up crosswise, so they were like little tree shed or tree circles, and throw them on a cookie sheet and put a little bit of cheese on them, heat them up so the cheese just melts, and they're pretty yummy that way.
Yeah, they can be.
Very easy.
You mentioned worm castings, and a lot of people are into vermicomposting, of having a worm bin, and that's another great use for those oversized zucchini, is to chop them up in little pieces and feed them to the worms.
Yep. I've got worms sitting behind me right now.
I don't doubt that in the least. When it comes to fertigation, a lot of people may not realize, but if they have a drip system already installed, they may have a Y filter on that drip system. It's like a little container that sort of comes down at a 45-degree angle at the valve where that drip is attached to. And you may notice that there's a little cap on it that you can undo. And you can actually undo the whole thing too, but you can undo that bottom cap to drain the system and clean the filter out, or unscrew the whole thing. And you could put fertilizer inside that.
Yep. I mean, yeah. Again, you need to read the manufacturer's directions so that you know how to dilute it. And don't think just because we're Americans that if a little is good, a lot is better. Mm-hmm. And not true. Follow label directions, and then on the product, and then you look at the device that you're using that as a siphon and multiply it appropriately.
As one who has worked with drip irritation for 30 years or more, the big lesson I learned about using that Y filter for fertilizing is make sure that it is compatible with a drip irrigation system. Otherwise, you run a big risk of clogging up the emitters. And any fertilizer you use in that Y filter on a drip system, I would at least once a month, if not every other week, undo the end caps on all your drip lines and flush out the system.
Yeah, that's really important. When you're, adding fertilizer through your drip system or any kind of equipment, even your siphons, when you are done adding the fertilizer, run water through the entire system. Peaceful Valley Farm Supply has a material called Therm X70 Yucca extract. It is organic, and they actually recommend using that and running that through your system to clean out the siphons as well as the emitters after you've fertilized.
Now, we should point out that you are not a paid spokesman for Peaceful Valley Farm Supply. You just like putting money into Patty's pocket.
Well, they have. I will admit they have been good to me, but they do their research. They're one of the best suppliers of organic type products and products for the garden and farm. And the stuff that they sell, they make sure that it works, and it does a really good job.
We'll have a link to groworganic.com as well on today's show notes, too, if you want to look that up. Well, we've learned a lot about fertigation, and fertilizing is part of garden basics, and fertigation just eases that process and cuts down the amount of time you have to spend fertilizing, because if you're in the habit of taking your 1 gallon or 2 gallon watering can and putting a couple of tablespoons of fertilizer in it and running around and doing each plant and doing that over and over again, that takes up a lot of time. But with a siphon system or a fertigation system, that certainly eases the fertilizer process. But again, let's point out one very important thing you said, and that is spend time with your plants. Get out there, observe, touch your plants, feel your plants, smell your plants, look at them, check them out. Talk to them, yeah.
There is research now that says that the plants hear you and that they respond to you. Yeah, you don't believe me. There's not a lot of research, but I think it will grow. And I think 500-600 years down the line, hopefully less, I think we will learn to communicate with plants. We now know that plants communicate with each other. They help.
Yeah, we saw that in a movie.
Yes.
Yes.
And so,
with, what's her face?
It's
a big movie.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of them out there.
Yeah. It was starring that woman who had aliens in another movie, but never mind.
No, I don't know. Okay. But also, Andrew wanted to know about cost effectiveness, and I did want to say something about that. A lot of people go for the cheapest stuff. There's going to be 5-6 fish fertilizers, and you want to save money. The inexpensive stuff it's typically inexpensive because it's not very good. The more expensive stuff does not necessarily mean that it's better. So, before you go to the store, do some research and find out which ones are good. And
what should you look for on the label that would indicate it's a quality product? What would be in it that would ease the fertigation process?
Well, the sad thing is, fertigation is relatively, I won't say new, but it hasn't been adopted very much. And so you're not going to be able to find on the labels that it's suitable for fertigation in most cases. But the quality of the fertilizer itself, the best way to tell is look where it says nutrients derived from. For example, there are some fish fertilizers that you would think fish is organic, but they'll contain things like urea and phosphoric acid. And so they're adding things to the fish emulsion. And really that's not what you want. In most cases, those additives, or in many cases, they're not organic and can do damage to your soil biology and the biology that's living on the plant leaves.
There we go. Anything more we should mention?
No, just, do your research. When you're buying a fish fertilizer, don't get the emulsions. And when you buy a seaweed product, it needs to contain Ascophyllum nodosum, and that should be the only thing that's in there.
He's been doing this for a long time. He is the John the Baptist of Northern California organic gardening, talking about the savior that's coming, and and finally the world's caught up to you.
Yeah, it's kind of it's exciting. I mean, even Farmer Fred has changed his ways from the first few times that we were on the air together.
That was many decades ago.
Yes, it was.
Yes, it was. All right, fine. Steve Zion, Living Resources Company. Good advice on fertilizing your plants. Steve, thanks so much.
It's been fun, Fred, as always. Thanks.
The Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast has a lot of information posted at each episode. Transcripts, links to any products or books mentioned during the show, and other helpful links for even more information. Plus, you can listen to just the portions of the show that interest you. It's been divided into easily accessible chapters. And you're going to find more information about how to get in touch with us. You can leave an audio question without making a phone call. You do it via SpeakPipe. Go to speakpipe.com/gardenbasics. It's easy. Give it a try. If you're listening to us via Apple Podcasts, put your question in the ratings and reviews section. You can text us questions and pictures or leave us your question at 916-292-8964. That's 916-292-8964. And you can email us, fred@farmerfred.com. And please tell us where you're from, because that'll help us greatly accurately answer your garden questions. Because after all gardening is local. In the show notes, you'll find links to all our social media outlets. That includes Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Also, you'll find a link to the farmerfred.com website. And thanks for listening. Garden Basics comes out every Tuesday and Friday. It's brought to you by Smart Pots. Garden Basics is available wherever podcasts are handed out, and that includes Apple, iHeart, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, Google, Podcast Addict, CastBox, and Pocket Casts. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and leaving comments. We appreciate it.